back in the studio, Fleur, for another exciting On Garden Design podcast episode. What are we talking about today?
Well, because it's very wintry in Canberra now, it's been a really good opportunity to talk about contemporary gardens because they hold their own all year, and particularly in winter when they look the same as when they're in summer, generally, then it's a good style to talk about.
And not dissimilar to formal gardens, actually, which we talked about not that long ago either. Similarly, this garden style is something that does have a lot all year round. So let's just talk about why would you do a contemporary garden? What does it offer?
Well, I think it offers minimal fuss and it's really good for entertaining.
Yes, that's true. That's true. In fact, I would take that a step further. I would say this is probably the garden style which is the one that is most purposeful. So it's, for me, the contemporary garden style is all about extending your living space. So, you know, you're really purposeful about what you want to use your garden for in this.
And generally, it will be about socialising. It has a central hub for getting together, and it is functional. It's all about function over nature.
Yes. And when you said no fuss, I think I would translate that into it's a very calm, simple, low-maintenance style as well.
Yeah, this is about as low maintenance as it gets when it comes to a outdoor space.
Yeah, that's right.
Nothing's no maintenance.
Yeah, exactly. These are gardens.
Yeah. There's still some things that live in it.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. So what makes up a contemporary garden style?
Well, I think what's useful is to look at its origins. Mm-hmm. So what we're talking about here, when we say contemporary, you're really talking about its origins in postmodernism architecture. So we're talking about the 1950s plus. And so this postmodernism architecture is, very clean lines, modern materials and minimalism. So that's where it's really the focus, minimalism. And so that's a key and deliberate shift from other gardens we've talked about that have a nod to history. This is all about leaving behind anything that happened in the war and moving into this new contemporary space. Yeah,
I really like that context actually. For me, it is absolutely all of that. It's very much about geometric shapes, clean structures, again, well-defined lines and areas, a bit like a formal garden in that way. No fuss, no clutter, minimalism, sleek, elegant, all of those kind of things, neutral palettes, all of that just makes something look very clean.
Yeah, and this less is more.
Yes. Less is more.
Yeah.
And that means it's more hard to get less. In many ways, I think.
Hard to get less. You know what? It's interesting because, once again, it sounds like we're describing something that's quite simple, but I'd say to you that this is probably one of the most complex styles when it comes to garden design, and I think it requires a huge amount of discipline. Restraint and adherence to principles to get it right. It's more complex than I think we're probably going to make it sound to be.
And in fact, in that respect, it reminds me very much of Japanese style gardens where, again, restraint has to be exercised to make it work. And I think it's the same for this kind of garden. This is not a garden where you go to Bunnings and you go, oh, I like the look of that, I'm going to buy it and stick it in your garden. Absolutely not here. That's a no-no.
Definitely. So who does this style of garden suit?
Me. How about that? Me. No, I think if I'm thinking more seriously about it, now maybe I should just describe me. No, I think this also is for someone who probably is quite structured and ordered. And I also think it's someone who's time poor, potentially, someone who wants to use their garden, who actually wants to do more than just look at it. But they want to also get a good sense of the aesthetic when they are using it, that they feel that it is, a garden that they appreciate and enjoy. So that's probably how I'd describe it. What about you?
Yeah, actually, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking contemporary gardens, I almost think of them not as gardens but as outdoor spaces.
They are. There's not that much garden.
No, that's right. So
soft garden, I should say.
Yeah. So I think it's for people who like to use their space for entertaining.
Yes.
And also for looking.
Yes.
So it's about framing views from inside the house and what you like to see outside.
The aesthetic is really important here.
Yeah, and it's not for what I think of as gardeners.
No.
This is not a gardener's garden.
Yes.
This is an entertainer's garden.
That's a really good point.
And people who also love textures of modern materials.
Yes, yes. And in fact, when you say not a gardener's garden, it's an entertainer's garden, I'd actually change that slightly too, because you might not be an entertainer, but you are someone who values the aesthetic, and you are very specific about very clean and crisp, sharp, well-defined aesthetics.
Yeah, which
would
is
be
and
the
probably a
description.
reflection of the inside of your house as well.
Yes.
Which is probably that very minimalist style and clean, crisp, modern materials.
Yeah, that's right. And I think this is one of those styles that you do really want to think about your architecture and how that will influence. And often with contemporary gardens, you'll find that it is an extended living space from your house. So, your garden will flow it will be continuous.
So like
almost.
you have these big bifold doors.
Exactly.
That stack right back.
That's
and
right.
inside-outside living.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you have a deck that continues, your floor at the same level. So it does feel like a continuous space.
So particularly good for warmer climates. I know we've got a lot of this sort of style of garden in Canberra, but the idea of having those bifold doors open all year round without any fly screens, it's probably not so practical.
No, it's not practical. But you can do things like, I have a reasonably contemporary garden, and we have massive fly screens that we can pull across as well, because we are also in a zone where we get quite a few mosquitoes and flies, and they're not pleasant to have inside. So there are solutions around that kind of thing, so you can still get that feeling. Large glass windows that look straight out into the garden, which really is just a continuation of your house.
Yeah.
Anyway,
terrific.
let's talk about how we do this stuff.
Absolutely. Well, probably the first one to start on is layout. So what's
Yes.
your classic layout for a contemporary garden?
Well, I think, again, for me, this is around being really clear about the purpose of what your garden's going to be used for. Are you going to entertain? Do you need an outdoor kitchen, an outdoor facilities to, entertain in that way? Is it around a pool? Is that the central feature? Or are you going to use it as a reflection space? Or is it something that you just want to look at that's beautiful? And so for me, it's being very clear about what the purpose is in this garden, and that will help you decide what your layout will be. Is there anything you want to add there? Because then I was going to go into the more, bits that make a layout.
Sure. Well, probably just overarching on layout first is I think this is the opportunity for asymmetry.
Yes, that's true.
So this is really where asymmetry is celebrated in a
Yes.
contemporary garden.
So let's reflect on what asymmetry is, just so that people can remember.
Not symmetry.
So I think, though, in a garden, the best description I came across when I was trying to describe asymmetry is if you think about those old-fashioned scales where you put the individual weights. So on one side you might have 2 kilos, and if you had 2 kilos on the other side, that's symmetrical. Asymmetry is if you have 2 kilos on one side and on the other side you might have 2 1 kilos. So that is asymmetry, but you still have a sense of balance.
Yeah.
And so that's what you still need to achieve here in your garden, even though you're being asymmetrical about it.
That's a great description because I can picture that exactly. It's the sort of thing you did in kindergarten where you stack all the green blocks over here that are lighter and smaller and one big block on that side, and it all happens to be the same weight, and you go, wow.
That's right. You just made me think about those boxes of wooden blocks that you used to have.
Yeah.
And they were different lengths and shapes. And you'd work out this one was the same size as this one, then you had to put them together.
So you've
God,
been trained. You've been trained right from the beginning to have that asymmetric built into you.
Yeah, that's right.
There you
Isn't
go.
that bizarre?
Yeah.
But that's a really good point. I think the other thing for me is this is, again, very much about geometric shapes, statement curves, very well-defined areas, strong beds. There's quite a bit of straightness, I feel, in a contemporary garden. It's not often super organic and curvy.
Yeah, I'm with you there. But also, the important thing is as long as it's spatially balanced.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And so anything else about layout that we should be thinking about if we're doing a contemporary garden?
No, I'd say probably we've got that right now. I agree with you, sort of interlocking geometric shapes.
Yeah.
It's quite important.
And I think, and I don't know that this is layout, but I think it's important to sort of just some, I guess, elements that are very important for a contemporary garden. Your hardscaping is central in a contemporary garden.
Yeah.
And so you really want to be thinking about how you manage that so it isn't overwhelming, and that to some extent comes into your layout. So if you're using a lot of hardscape, how are you going to balance that with some softscapes so it doesn't feel like it's just a hard, unwelcoming and, unfriendly spot.
Yeah. So what are some of the techniques you could do for that?
Well, certainly it's about your materials. So if you have a lot of very hard materials, a lot of stone or, paving, those kind of hardscapes, you might want to bring some more natural woods, some rusted metal in it. And then you also want to be thinking about your beds and how you might soften things with some of the plantings in your beds.
Yeah, that's
What else
great.
would you do?
So I agree with you. I think you need to have because we're really celebrating modern materials here. So some things I've seen done really well that adds that sort of softening effect is wood grain textured concrete. So they're concrete sleepers that have been pressed into a wood grain kind of press.
I'm making a face because I really don't like them.
But, and it's having them laid down as sort of very long pavers. And then you might have some gravel or something in between. But the thing is what they provide is some texture.
Yes.
And they are celebrating a modern material. So they're not pretending to be timber.
Yes.
They're quite clearly, unapologetically concrete, but they've got a softening in the finish of them.
Yeah, and in fact, if you've just triggered me to absolutely think what I was describing is texture is really important in the contemporary garden as well. So getting a balance of texture so you don't have all hard or all soft, because that will start to help shape what your garden looks like. So you're thinking about like wood is softer than concrete is softer, and then your colours on top of that will also help with that hard and soft feel.
Yeah. What I've seen recently, which is really visually pleasing, is the use of batten cladding.
I don't even know what that is. So what do you mean?
You've got it all over your house.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just think of it as wood cladding.
so wood cladding, but it's basically a whole series of little battens. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, it
like
does.
Upright, vertical, parallel battens.
Yes.
And it creates a really good visual effect.
Yes.
Particularly on, vertical surface or even underneath the roofing of a pergola or something like that. So that's what you're looking up to. And that looks really sharp.
It does. It does. In fact, we have it on our ceiling. I don't know if you've noticed it defines, we've got a very large room, which is our family room. It defines where the dining room table is above it.
Ah, yes, there you go. So you can use it inside.
Yeah, that's right.
It's as well as outside.
But it's a way you can actually define a room, for instance, or a particular use or purpose for a space. And so, I really like it too. The challenge you have with it outside is that, one, it's very hard to maintain because it's got so much texture on it.
Yeah, you mean in terms of like varnishing?
Exactly. Staining it and maintaining it in that way. And the spiders like to grow in those cracks as well.
That's right.
Very neat place for them. Anyway, but it does look good.
It does look good, but in line with the sort of celebrating modern materials, you can get a lot of this batten cladding now in composite timbers that are done very well, and they just don't fade, they don't warp, they don't need the treatment that the timber does. And also you can get them in aluminium that looks like timber.
Yes, that's right.
And that's actually, some of that stuff is really well done.
It is.
You've got to touch it to know that it's not wood.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess this is all about celebrating technology to some extent as well. That's contemporary.
Yeah.
And a lot of the early and very famous houses in, say, where am I thinking? Palm Valley. Is it Palm? No, Palm Springs. Palm Springs in the US. They absolutely celebrated the modern concretes and things like that in their designs. So if we keep going, shall we talk about plants next?
Yeah, why not?
Let's go into plants. So what would you do for plants in a contemporary garden?
Yeah, so repetition of minimal block planting. That's kind of your classic contemporary garden. So what we mean by that is the one plant used over and over in an area, and then you take that same effect and you use it in another part of the garden over and over.
Yeah, mass plantings.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'd also say, though, that you do have a limited plant palette, but you might have some very architectural statement plants as well, where you might want to, draw the eye, and often they're closer to the house than further away. I think with the larger block in particular, with a contemporary garden, you almost have more of the big sort of statement stuff close to the house, and then it kind of dissolves with the mass plantings into the distance. I know that sounds weird, but I think that if you are in this space, it's almost like it then starts to blend into the landscape the further out it goes.
Right.
For contemporary
so things
gardens.
like that are really architecturally effective. So some of the palms.
Yes.
Things like
Cordylines, yuccas.
Yeah.
Phormium.
Dracaena. Those that are, I think, they call them dragon trees.
Yes.
Something really, even like a frangipani, actually.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I was even thinking about, the agaves and the aloes that have very big structural leaves. Like the succulents lend themselves to this stuff.
Mother's-in-law tongue.
I can't stand them. Yes, but yes, absolutely.
Sansevieria, is that what it's called?
I don't know what they're called.
And it's just, the idea is it's just a big, like it's a tall, spiky, often variegated succulent, and it's really architectural.
Very architectural. And I think that the mass plantings, though, often this is where you'll see mass grasses or, something that might also have a bit of movement to soften the hard surfaces too.
Yeah, the ornamental grasses.
That's right, exactly, So the miscanthus and the...
Stipa, Pennisetum.
That's the one.
Yeah,
yep.
Love them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah.
So in terms of colour palettes, what would you be thinking for plants here?
Green, really.
Yeah, okay.
I'm thinking green because this is, remember, we're going for calm and tranquil.
Mm-hmm.
We're not really doing, you can have sort of this modern fusion thing where you can actually have a pop of orange or a pop of a colour, but that's usually done as part of the hardscaping.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be kind of like a feature wall or a bunch of a sculptural element as opposed to a plant. I think the plant palette tends to be very green.
That's interesting. So I'd say green and grey, actually. So the blue-grey leaves as well as the green. And again, I agree totally. Sparing use of pops of colour. But it might be that actually you get that pop of colour in variegation on that structural plant that you might have.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But when, on colour, when it comes to the hardscaping elements, I think we're really talking about primary monochromatic palette.
Neutrals.
So we're talking about blacks, greys, whites.
For me, there's also a lot of the off beige cream, sort of like not stark necessarily, not stark, but it's subdued, whichever way you look at it.
Yeah, definitely subdued. Actually, water. Water's probably what we need to talk about.
Yes, true. So what are you going to talk about water?
Well, I think the contemporary garden should have water in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think water's a key feature.
Mm-hmm.
And often it's in a water wall,
Mm-hmm.
which might have a reflective base on it.
Mm-hmm.
So the water kind of trickles down a reflective base. So water wall is one option. Otherwise, you can get very contemporary water features.
That's what I was going to say. I think the key here is your water feature reflects the contemporariness of the garden.
Yeah.
Here's not to have your mini Versailles.
No.
Or, your little cherub boy peeing into a pond of some sort.
No cherubs to be seen in these gardens.
No, not at all. Not at all.
But water cascading or a pond that's a reflection pond, they can be quite at home in this space.
I also think of a lot of contemporary gardens have pools. And so if you have a pool, that becomes your water space. And often your pool is almost it's an extension of the design. It's not like in other places where you almost have a pool put in because it's a pool. This is actually where you have a custom pool which is built into your hardscaping, which really reflects your design. You might even have it so that I've seen some amazing stuff where they've done, a natural filtration system at one end of the pool and then it goes into the bit that you swim in at the other end. That's the kind of thing that you might look at, if you have the money, in a contemporary design.
Right. Yeah, I was, as you were first speaking there, I was visualising very much a Palm Springs.
Yes, yeah.
Where the pool is very
central.
It's central, and it's also, the pool itself is finished in a very strong blue, like a bright blue. So you've got this, the blue is almost the same as a sky reflecting.
Yeah.
And then around the pool is really quite strong in terms of whites, and then the plantings are in green. So it's that really blue, white, green. And the house is wrapped around the pool.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's the focal point. The pool is your water focal point. I'll also try and find this other couple of pools I'm thinking about where they are more of a natural feeling pool, but they are in a very contemporary setting. So I'll see if I can find that, because they are all very contemporary materials. They're not the Palm Springs pools are much more artificial looking.
Yeah, but that's what I think this is about, because the naturalistic, I think what you're describing is a naturalistic setting. So a naturalistic pool, but put into a contemporary garden. Whereas really when we're thinking about the contemporary gardens, I think we're thinking about modern, clean, crisp, minimal maintenance.
And I think this is where contemporary starts to blur, because I think contemporary can also be, and the pools I'm thinking of actually had very clear, crisp contemporary lines, but they did have an element of, we're caring a bit about the environment here as well. And so we're incorporating very new technology and a bit of ecosystem thinking into how we're designing our contemporary garden. So I think it is a blurring of two elements there as well. But I also do think that a lot of contemporary gardens have almost a natural, like if we're talking about materials, for me they are also pretty naturalistic in some ways. The stone is often featured, like the big paving flagging stones, the wood, the rusted metal. They are all, for me anyway, they're much more naturalistic than, the bright, stark white concrete that some contemporary gardens have.
Yeah, so materials, I think the key thing here is we're talking about, it's quite bold. So
yes.
Oversized pavers.
Yeah, that's
we're talking
right.
about big pavers or concrete block.
Yep.
And also things like any walls we have tend to be rendered and painted. It's it's a very clean finish.
Yep. Well, I think of cast concrete as well, though.
Cast concrete, yes.
Large cast concrete blocks.
That's absolutely, yeah. And also large, like decorative sort of stones or pebbles, like shiny ones, not river rocks.
Yeah, yeah.
But kind of large white pebbles, or even ones that might be coloured, and then that might be where the water wall is cascading onto large white pebbles or something like that. So things that are just sort of a bit oversized and quite bold.
Yes, and I think that there is a proportion element here. This is not a style that lends itself to lots of little bitsy things. This is where you go bold and you go big.
Like you said at the beginning, stylish, clean and crisp.
Yes, and that goes for your furniture and your pots, all of your little features and bits that you might have around as well. Again, you want simple, clean lines, larger pieces, fewer of them. This is not a place where you're putting your wrought furniture or your cane, lounge. That doesn't fit in this space. And you're also thinking about matching pieces. It's very much, everything is very precisely, I guess, curated to be part of that design.
Mm. Yeah. So what sort of furniture would you put in?
Well, I think wood often lends itself very well in contemporary designs, but also those blended wood and metal, for instance, and also some of that, I don't know how to describe it, it's like wire furniture, metal furniture.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That might actually have a coating on it, that kind of thing. What would you be thinking about in a contemporary design?
Well, you see, because before you said no wicker, but when I think of contemporary, I think of those, they're actually really rattan.
Oh, yeah. And but they don't look rattan.
No, they don't. Yeah. And they're very sharp edges, like
that's right, modular.
That's it. That's what I'm thinking. So I think of these modular outdoor furniture settings that they look very modern because of the shape that they are.
That's right.
And that's sort of what
again,
I'm
they're
thinking.
large, they're quite heavy. Yeah, they're very structured. Because when I think of cane furniture, I think of the much lighter bamboo kind of coloured, little frilly bits around them.
Yeah, definitely not that.
Yeah, not that. Absolutely.
No.
And in fact, the other thing I was just thinking about for a contemporary garden, you might actually use a lot more of that thinking where you have some cast concrete which actually doubles as your furniture, and it might also be a garden bed edge, or, it's part of the raised terrace and you create quite a large depth to your edge, which then you use as part of your seating or something like that. That lends itself very much to the contemporary design.
Yeah, I agree. So other features in a contemporary garden, abstract art and abstract sculpture. This is where you can have your abstract type of things.
That's right. You're allowed to go wild here.
That's right. Anything goes, but just not too much colour.
Yes, that's right.
And I actually think of, when I think of abstract gardens, I think of those reflective gazing balls. Do you know those? They're sort of spheres, and they're basically like a mirrored sort of ball. You might have three of them, different sizes, and they sort of sit on the side of
carefully
pavers.
placed so somewhere.
Yeah, and they're quite intriguing, and they do bounce light round, and they're just very, very modern. I mean, it doesn't get much more modern, does it?
That's right.
Or concrete spheres.
Yes.
So balls of concrete placed neatly around the courtyard area or something
the perimeter
like that.
of your pool or whatever it might be.
That's right. That's right.
But
rather than having an urn with annuals spilling out, it's a nice concrete sphere that's neat and very, very streamlined.
Yeah, it's restrained again.
Yeah.
And I think the key here is you don't have lots of sculpture. You're having one or two highlighting pieces. You're not using lots of bits. This is not where you kind of go wild unless you've got a massive garden.
Yeah.
You are really being very restrained in how many pieces you might put into this garden.
Okay. So, and actually the other thing I think is quite a good feature which you see in these is a fire table. So they, generally they're kind of made of cast concrete, and then they've got the ethanol clean energy fire burner, and they look very neat and purposeful.
That's
right. And that, might be centred around that rattan couch.
Yeah, and in fact, the other thing I think of those, helping to divide an outdoor living space. So you might have that becomes almost like your partition between your lounge type area and your cooking area or your seating area or whatever it might be. Or it's, the space between you and the garden. It just creates a bit of a partition of some sort in a wall. The other thing that I think is quite an important feature of a contemporary garden is lighting.
Yeah.
And I think here, of course you're thinking about, sort of directional lighting, so helping you walk through the garden at night, and safety and all of those kind of things. But you're also thinking about how you spotlight and feature things. So if you have an amazing sculpture of some sort, you might be thinking about having some lighting on that in terms of the spotlight and being very clear about, it's very purposeful and intentional. We're not talking floodlights here. It's, again, about capturing the mood and the cleanness, and your fixtures are important. So, again, you're thinking about very clean, stainless, black, or something like that in your lighting fittings.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it comes back to that point where I was saying that contemporary gardens are often for, you want to use them at night, but also you want to see them from your large glass windows.
That's right.
And appreciate it's this inside-outside living, so the outside space is very much brought into your inside experience.
Yes. And in fact, sort of it's the thing where you might enjoy also how the leaves, display shadows in another part of your garden, and that kind of thing where you, again, soften things using your lighting patterns. If you obviously have quite a bit of hardscape.
Yeah.
So what have we missed?
Structures. Right. So structures, I think you kind of, when you described the lighting fittings that you want to use, I think that actually described what the type of structures I'm thinking as well. So those black metal or stainless steel metal. Stainless steel is metal.
We knew what you meant.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So very clean, flush lines. So if you are having some sort of pergola or arbour, it's not fussy. It's strong and it's clean and it's it's neatly welded and joined.
That's right. Because when I think of pergolas, you often have those funny-looking, overhanging kind of beam elements. None of that here.
Yeah, that's
you
right.
have a very neat edge. Absolutely. And pergolas, and here's not a place for arbours so much unless it's a very contemporary one, and it's almost sculptural. Is what I'd say
it's more
about
a pergola over an entertaining space.
Yeah, that's right.
And not planted out with vines. It's just the pergola structure for what it is.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And the other one, in terms of structures, which I think can work really well in a contemporary space, is a sunken fire pit. So clean, neat lines, paved to the edge, and then you sink down into a couple of steps. It's got some nice lighting on the steps, and the fire pit itself isn't necessarily a wood fire, but once again, this sort of fire table. So it's crisp and contemporary, a couple of cushions around on concrete seating, very neat and clean.
Fire pits really lend themselves to the contemporary garden, in fact.
Yeah.
Very
Because it's about the social thing. It's about entertaining. It's about
That's
the purpose of the whole contemporary space is about
bringing
entertaining
people together
and not fussing in the garden.
Yes, we're not having to weed around here if we can help it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any garden you don't have to weed, though. Anyway, have we missed anything?
Well, I think this is worth a comment on maintenance.
Yes.
So we said before that this is a fairly low maintenance. So what kind of maintenance can we expect in this sort of garden?
It's a good question. So I think, again, this is a garden that needs to be kept neat. So if you have too much stuff that's starting to get leggy or sprawling beyond the garden beds and borders, then there's going to be some cleaning up there. This is not a garden where you want to allow things to self-seed in little nooks and crannies, so you'll be doing some weeding. But I think that's probably it, and you want to probably make sure that you're doing a bit of pruning to maintain sculptural shapes so that things don't start just looking out of control and a bit odd as well. What else can you think of?
Yeah.
And your water features will have to be looking after.
Yeah, well, that's probably, I think in this garden, the majority of the maintenance isn't about the plants. The majority of the maintenance will be on keeping your surfaces clean. So, a good karcher on your, stone.
She's talking about
paving.
the high pressure hose off thing.
That's it. That's
The
it.
machine.
So keeping things nice and clean. So that's where you don't want to have
Sealing
a lot
your
of deciduous trees or anything dropping leaves, because that sort of is not what you want.
And it stains.
Stains, you don't want that. And the other maintenance factor is water.
Yes.
So that's where you need to have really, keep those water features clean.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But other than that, it's probably not an enormously high maintenance.
No.
And the intent is that it's not that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Bit of pruning and bit of cleaning up.
Yeah. So are there any key things that you want to draw out of this one?
Well, I think I want to ask that question that I put to you in another episode, where right at the end we say, it sounds kind of easy, but what can go wrong in trying this style? So for our listeners at home who say, oh, this is me, I'm an entertainer and I'm not really a gardener and I'm a low fuss person, I'll do this. But what will catch them out? How do you get it wrong?
Yeah, it's a good question. And for me, it's almost the same as in a formal garden, that you use too much hardscape. You don't get the balance with your hard and soft scapes right. So it's not inviting. It's not comfortable.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, again, that you're not good at maintaining that restraint, and you end up filling spaces up with pots and the Bunnings plants that you can't resist, and that kind of thing. What about you?
Yeah, look, bang on, I reckon, on, getting rid of any clutter and resisting adding any more in.
That's right.
Yeah, and resisting adding extra colour as well. You want to be really true to this style.
Don't buy that cool pillow or cushion that you see when you're internet shopping late at night.
Yeah.
It's not going to work in this space.
Yeah, it's a really intentional design area, this contemporary space, but also not being bold enough. I think you've got to go with a really bold mindset and say, it's unapologetically modern, and you just put in big, bold features, and you've got to cut away anything that's fussy.
I think that's very true. That's very true. That's a good note to end on. Hey, cut away anything that's fussy, a bit like life. Cut away anything that's fussy and just focus on the stuff that matters.
Well, I hope our listeners don't think we're fussy and cut us away.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. We're not fussy, we're bold.
That's right. So then what's a couple of your key takeaways?
Key takeaways. So I really like this style. There you go. That's my key takeaway. But I think that the thing for me about a contemporary garden is it is calm if you get it right. It's simple. There is no fuss. It is purposeful. It makes sure you get the best out of your garden, and it makes sure you really think about your intention before you go to design this garden so that you use it.
Fantastic.
What about you?
Well, I would just add one last one. Less is more.
Yeah. That's a good one. I think that applies to pretty much every garden style.
I don't know, cottage. More is more.
Yeah, true. Yeah, okay. You've blown that theory out of the water. You've blown that theory out of the water. I think we're probably at the point where we need to wrap up. So thanks again for listening to us. Don't forget to follow us on anywhere you get your podcast, so Spotify, Apple Podcasts and the others. And you can also leave us a review so that we know more about what you'd like to hear about and whether you're enjoying it, and it will help other people find us. So we hope to listen along with you next time. Thanks so much.
See you then.
Bye.
You're listening to On Garden Design with Fleur and Sachi. If you're enjoying this episode, let us know by buying us a coffee through the Ko-fi link in the description of each episode.